Hi all. We're going to talk about Excel pivot tables. It's kind of a tough topic, but this is a real simple example, and I think once you see this, then the other things that you read on pivot tables will make more sense. So I have this set up in a Word file, and I've been using this for years when I teach an Excel class at college. Instead of trying to stumble through it live with Excel, I think for this example it's sweet and simple. Works nice. So there's many books written on this topic. There's whole books written on this topic. So we're not trying to cover the whole topic. This is just one simple example. And to explain where I'm coming from, when I teach this stuff, there's no magic. I just flip through books, try and find a simple example, and then I show it. A simple example to explain a topic. Well, if I can't find a simple one, then I create one. And that's what I ended up doing with this lecture. Flipped through a bunch of books, couldn't even find just one simple example. Just show me what a pivot table is. So I just sat down one night, and this is what I came up with. So it turned out pretty good, but it's kind of a hack, but it turned out decent. So of course I polished it up a little bit here and there. So when you see a pivot table, just think of it as a summary of a spreadsheet. Okay? Kinda. Let's say, for example, you're working in sales, and your boss, you've got a spreadsheet of all the sales in the United States or whatever your country is. Your boss comes to you and says, okay, show me the sales just for New York State. Well, how do you do that? You go grab your spreadsheet, start going through the records and deleting all the records that aren't in New York State. That's what some people might think of. If you've got lots of records, hundreds or thousands of, by a record I mean each line in the spreadsheet, well, that might get pretty tricky, right? So that's where a pivot table comes in. You can create a pivot table and then pivot on each state. Let's say your spreadsheet covers the whole country, U.S., 50 states. Right? Well, you want to see the sales in New York, you can pivot to just see the sales in New York. You want to see the sales just for Texas, you can pivot to Texas. So how would we set that up? So here, this is just a silly example. I think if I did polish it up, I would do it with that state example. So that would be a nice example. This is just a simple spreadsheet. We have two columns. Okay, so we click where we want the spreadsheet to go. Okay, so we click this cell and select the cell. You can tell the cell is selected because you have the black outline. Then go to the Insert tab. We're in Excel, right? And the first item is Pivot Table. You can see it's got a little drop down arrow there. And you have two choices. You can make a pivot table or you could do a pivot chart. They both work the same. So we're just going to work with a pivot table. Okay. So when you select Pivot Table, Excel throws up a pop-up box. That's this box here. So it's asking you two questions. This question here at the top and this question here at the bottom. Okay, they're both easy questions. Yeah. Where do you want the spreadsheet to go? And what part of the table do you want to use? Okay, so Excel displays a pop-up box. We need to answer two questions. What cells do you want to use? Let's say you have a huge pivot table. You may not want to use the whole thing. You only want to use certain parts of it. And where do you want the pivot table to be displayed? Normally, 99% of the time, you put it on a new spreadsheet, right? Because the current spreadsheet you're working on is usually full, right? So you don't want to mess that spreadsheet up. So that's like sheet 1. So you would say a new worksheet, have it go to sheet 2. But just for this example, we're using existing worksheet right here, so we can see both items on the page. So it'll be easier to understand. We don't have to switch back and forth between sheet 1, sheet 2. Okay. So this line, because we selected this cell, Excel put this line in here. So that's a tough line. Okay, if you're not used to looking at stuff like this, there's nothing easy about that line at all. But follow me here, okay? It's just cell D1. See how we have D1 selected here. So because we had D1 selected here, Excel automatically wrote this line for us and put in cell D1. Okay. If you're somewhat familiar with Excel, you know the dollar signs means it's an absolute cell. Right? Absolute means it's not going to change. So it's just saying $D, $1. It's an absolute cell. We're on sheet 1. So it wrote sheet 1. We're on sheet 1. They use the exclamation point as a separator. Don't let that exclamation point mess you up. Okay, it's just a simple separator. They could have used any character there. They just picked that one because they said, well, what can we use there that won't mess up something else in Excel? We have to find a character that's normally not used. So they threw in that thing. Okay, so on sheet 1, separator, cell D1, that's absolute. So don't let that line scare you. It's definitely a tough line. So. But you don't have to write it. Just kind of understand it. Okay, now here, what part of the table do we want to use? Well, for this example, we want to use all of it. both of these. So you can just click that little box, drag your mouse around these cells, and you get the dancing ants. Once you drag your mouse around the dancing ants, you can always move them. It's kind of tricky to grab that line. You left click and hold and drag these around. You just have to mess around with it until you get it to work right. As we clicked here and drug the mouse over those cells, Excel wrote this line for us. So it's basically the same as this line. So we're on sheet 1. There's the exclamation point, and then we started at cell A1, and went down to cell B10. Okay, colon as a separator. Don't let the colon mess you up. It's just a separator. There's no magic going on there. Okay, so sheet 1, the exclamation point is the separator. Start at cell A1, A1, and go down to cell B10, colon as a separator. Piece of cake, right? If you didn't get that, I have both of them explained here, line by line. So it shouldn't be that hard. If you're real new to Excel, it's going to be tough. But if you have even a basic understanding of Excel, these things should be somewhat simple. This last line here, that's just my cursor bouncing. So. Here's the second one. Line by line, I explain it. Okay, after you take care of those two things, you click the OK button. And Excel creates an empty pivot table. This is your empty pivot table. They throw a couple graphics in to fancy it up, but we had selected cell D1, right? So that's where it put our pivot table. And then it threw up this pane here. This is the pane that we use to create our pivot table, add data to the pivot table. See, this is just an empty pivot table. There's no numbers in it. So we have to take our columns, column A, column B, 1 and A, and add this data to the pivot table. And the way we do that is we grab these columns here, just left click and hold, and drag them down into these boxes. Now where you click and hold and drag these in, that's the tough part. My experience is just keep trying different things until the pivot table does what you want to display. If you're real smart at this stuff, you might be able to conceptualize how you want to display your stuff on your spreadsheet. And then you also get a new contextual tab here at the top. So you get a whole toolbar just to work with pivot tables. A whole new toolbar in Excel just to work with pivot tables. Okay, so first thing we do is grab number 1 and grab it down in the rows. And it created our rows. Just left click, hold, drag it down there, drop it. When you drop that in there, Excel wrote this whole thing. It wrote all this, it wrote all this stuff, it put the numbers in here. And then grab and hold the A and drag it into this column, and it wrote all this stuff for us. So you can see, just by taking that item there and dropping it here, there's a lot going on here. Excel added these words up here, these words over here. You know, it set up this whole graphic. You know. Now, if you notice though, on these numbers here, we lost our number 1. Number 1 was used here, but it wasn't displayed here. And same thing with the A. A here got used here, but it didn't get displayed here. So, you know, from my point of view, that's kind of odd. You know, that's part of your data. It should be displayed here. Okay, so what I did there was I backed out of that. I just hit the undo a couple times, and then I selected these 2 items and clicked insert, and inserted a new row up top here. That's easy. That's easy stuff, right? So we have a blank row here. Then I just said, okay, num. This column is num, is named num. This column is named item. And then I went through the whole thing of creating the pivot table again. And then I drug number down into here, item down into here, and now we get our 1 back, and we get our A back here. Okay, so we have a pivot a pivot table here, but we don't have anything displayed on it. There's no numbers here. Okay, so we have to create another column. Okay, so we created this cost column here. Cost. Let's say we're selling a bunch of stuff. Some stuff costs $1, some stuff costs $2, some stuff costs $3, and so on. Okay. Now, just because we added that column, the pivot table doesn't know about it. You got to go out and tell the pivot table you created a new column. Okay. You could go right back to the beginning and start from scratch again, but that's not the normal way to do it. Okay, so first, the pivot table is right up against this column. We need to move it over. Okay, so I click this move pivot table button. Told Excel where I wanted to move it. And then when you click the OK button, it moves the cell over, or it moves the pivot table over. Just type in E1 here. Okay, so we just moved it over a little bit so we have a blank row here, or a blank column, just so it looks nice. So now we have to go out and tell the pivot table that we created this column here. So that's this button here, change data source. Now don't let the word mess you up, data source. That just means where are we getting our data? Where are we getting our numbers? You know? It could be coming from a spreadsheet, it could be coming from a database, it could be coming from anywhere. You know? But it says click here, choose change data source. It threw up this pop-up, and then you just redrag over your cells. Excel created a new line. Start at A1, go down to C11, 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 C11. Okay, then we get a new item here in our pane. Grab cost and drag it down into the values box. How did I know where to drag it? I was just fiddling around trying to get something to work. These are values, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that looked like a good spot to drag it. So then it displayed our numbers here. But we lost our dollar signs, and we lost our decimal points, and we lost the zeros. So right click on this item here, go to value field settings. So right click right on sum of cost. Or yeah, and then you get this pop up here, then click this one, and that brings us back to your main setting box in Excel that you've seen 1,000 times. Format cells. So then I just selected currency, chose the top item here, click the OK button, and then we got our dollar signs back, and we got the zeros back. Just to show you how some of this stuff works, if we got tired of looking at that pane on the right hand side, you could click that X to close it. Now the pivot table goes way over to the side. We can pivot this a little bit with these little drop downs here, but I wouldn't really call it a pivot there. I'd say, well, we're just choosing rows and columns. But if you click those little down things here, those little down arrows, you can go in and uncheck some of these. You know, let's say you only want to display 1 through 5. For some reason, you just want to display part of it. If you wanted to get that right hand pane back, you could click this box here, field list, and that brings up that field list again. Okay, so now we have to do something with this guy, the filter. The filter would be, well, we have 50 states. I only want to see one state. We filtered out all the other states. This is supposed to be the picture, a small picture of a funnel. You're not displaying the whole thing, you're only kind of displaying one little part. So we need another column. we created a column that says shelf. Top shelf, middle shelf, bottom shelf. Let's say you have a warehouse and you've got a bunch of things that you sell. Some of it's on the top shelf, some of it's on the middle shelf, some of it's on the bottom shelf. That's what I'm talking about here. Then we got to go out and do a change data source again to tell the pivot table about this item. And then drag once that item shows up in the pane, drag it into your report filter box. Okay, so once you drag that item into the report filter box, the pivot table creates this at the top, and that's where we can actually filter. We can actually pivot on our data. See, now it's set to all. If we click that little down arrow, we can see here's the different shelves. Top shelf, middle shelf, bottom shelf. We can go in and say, okay, just show me the items on the top shelf. Click the OK button. Now it's only displaying the items on the top shelf. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Can go in, click that guy again, click him again, choose the middle shelf, and now it only displays the items on the middle shelf. Okay, so that's just a real small example to give you an idea of what a pivot table is and how you might use one. So here, I'll just slowly skim through this so it's on the video again, so you can kind of read the text. Okay. See ya. Bye.